I'll try to be brief because we really want to leave some time for conversation. We were quite earnest about that. But I had a few things I wanted to say. First of all, I think it says something about the complexity of place that I feel a sense of being at home here in Malibu and Pepperdine, even though I don't live here. I did live here for 9 or so blissful months, and I noticed a tick. I was introducing Dean Wilburn a little while ago, and I said, "And this is our dean, Jim Wilburn." Well, you know, our not in the sense of wishful thinking, but in the sense of that this is a community I am part of, so I'm happy. I'm so happy to see Belinda and, you know, Ashley and other people here in the audience that I know, Max, people from Malibu. And this relates to, and I'll come back to this, to a phrase that I think Rod used, especially a place to call your own. I think both of you used this phrase, that there's some way in which placemaking has elements both of accepting what is given and doing something with it. Rod's wonderful quotation, I don't know whether you realized you were quoting from Giuseppe de Lampedusa's The Leopard. Oh, you were, okay. That in order for things to stay the same, things have to change. And I'd actually love to digress and talk about that in the context of The Leopard, which is a great book and a great movie. But I won't. I will forswear that for now. But there is this element of in making a place your own, both of claiming it and accepting it as it is. That a place that you want to make your own is a place that in some way calls out to you. You don't just sort of randomly pick a plot of ground and say, okay, this looks as good as any place. I'm going to make this my own. I'm going to put the household gods here and claim it for myself. So it seems to me that there's an interesting kind of movement involved in this whole process of thinking about place. And that just as it would be a mistake to fetishize movement, as I think Susan's remarks suggest that we are in danger of doing, or maybe have already done, there's also a danger of fetishizing place, which I think we're not in danger of doing anytime soon, although maybe some of Ruthie's acquaintances might have seemed that way to you, Rod, and at least at one time or another, maybe not now. I think Concord and New Hope, what a great story that is. I mean, about the flawedness of the rooted communities. That's a good reminder of that. But let's, you know, my job here is to comment on what I've heard. So if this seems a little disjointed or ramshackle, that's because it is. But I was thinking as they were talking in terms of a kind of tension between presence and journey. Those might not be the two best terms, but let me try some examples. Tell some stories. One story. When I lived in South Louisiana for a number of years on the faculty of Tulane University, and I got to know. I actually knew Walker Percy's priest, a man who, believe it or not, had the name Tom Clancy. But he was a Jesuit and not a wealthy man, a writer of spy novels, but a very interesting fellow. And we used to have lunch together and talk about all manner of things, theological things, gossip, this mixture of the two. And one time I asked him, "What do you think Jesus meant when he asked the question, who is my neighbor? Who is your neighbor?" He said, "Oh, it's easy. It's the person you really don't want to have anything to do with and don't want to talk to, but is nevertheless there and has to be dealt with." I think that's speaking to the notion of presence. And a better story, I think, a less dispiriting one, comes from a friend of mine who works in various, I guess you could call them ministries involved. He's particularly involved in things like sexual trafficking, and so combating it, that is, of course. Have to be careful. And he speaks to students all the time, particularly at religious colleges, and you know, he'll give these very inspiring speeches on how you've got to go out there and make a difference, you know, in the world. And one time he has a guy in the audience who raises his hand and says, "I want to go out and change the world. I really want to make a difference. Tell me what I should do. You know, I've spent my whole life in this little community. I want to go out there and be a world beater. And what should I do?" And my friend said, "Well, I think the first thing you could do is organize the hall in your dormitory and clean it up." And it was a kind of brilliant puncturing of this balloon of earnest self-importance that often the thing that we need to do is right in front of us. This is what I mean by presence. This is what Tom Clancy meant by his notion of the neighbor is the person right there in front of you, that you would rather think about anything else but that person. Okay, but journey, that's the other half of it. I think there are times when one has to get away, whether using Southwest Airlines or any other means. And I think Rod shouldn't be so hard on himself about that. And here I think of another story. I'm trying to show I'm a Southerner too, with all these stories. But I think this was a story that I found very mind-opening. It was I spent a year in Rome as a Fulbright professor, and it was a wonderful year. And of course, Rome, you know, there's no place more full of a sense of place and rootedness in the past and everything along those lines you can think of. And I was in hog heaven with that. One of the things some of you know about Italy is that if you're going to be in a place for a long time, a very good idea is to sort of establish yourself, particularly at a bar, which is what a coffee house. That's what they call a coffee house. And so I dutifully did that in my neighborhood, and got to know some of the locals, and who would occasionally let me try to speak Italian to them, and then take pity on me and speak English to me. And there was one guy in particular who used to come in with long tubes. He would come in on his big black motorcycle. You know, Italians and motorcycles. He would come in this big black motorcycle. He always wore all black, and lay out these blueprints. And be looking at them. And after 5 or 6 times, I sort of got up the courage to sort of go up and say, "Who are you? What do you do? What are you doing?" And he was very interested in talking, so we became friends. And after a while, he said, "You know, I want to ask you, why did you come here?" And I said, "Why did I come to Rome? Are you serious? You're really asking me this question?" And he says, "Yes, I want to know." And so I went into explication of it that of which I think Rod would entirely improve, about all the ways that the layers of the past were evident, and you had this feeling of walking through time and sense of connection to the deep past of the human race, the Western world, so on and so forth. And he's sort of nodding, yeah, I've heard all this before. And then he says, "You know, you came here. Everything that attracted you to come here is what I want to get away from." And I said, "Oh, so where do you want to go?" And he says, "I'd like to go to America." He'd never been. I said, "Well, where in America do you want to go?" "Las Vegas, Miami, you know, the places that Americans, you know, the kind of Americans who go to Italy generally do not hold in very high esteem. You know, you want to hear Boston, or you know, but no. And he was absolutely sincere about this. And after a while, I came to understand 2 reasons for this. One is that if you're an architect, Rome is a very tough place to be, particularly if you're a modern architect. There are not many opportunities to build. There's so much of the past. The past is a kind of weight that we Americans have never had to deal with. So he looked upon the arid wastes of Las Vegas as all kinds of opportunity for a young architect. But I think a lot of it was deeper than that. It was a sense that the weight of the past was too much. The weight of not just the cultural past, but of his own family, the expectations of his family. He wanted to have a kind of wanderjahr. He wanted to be free of that for a while. And I thought that was very healthy, and it was a good antidote to my adulation of Rome and of Rome's rich past. So I think there's something of this in, Walker Percy's been mentioned a couple of times, and I actually have a wonderful quotation from Walker Percy that I'm going to read eventually, if I can find it. But Percy also, for all of his commitment to place, to this area of Kentucky where he farms and writes, he didn't always stay there. He went away too. He had to come back, and had to have an experience of going away and then coming back. And there's a wonderful line from T.S. Eliot that I wish I had looked up before this, from Little Giddings. Some of you may know it. That goes something like this. Have to reconstruct my notes here. We shall not cease from our explorations, and the result will be to bring us back to the place where we began and recognize it for the first time. I probably mangled that, but you get the idea that there's something in this process of journey that may bring us back to the place where we began, but to see it in a whole different way. And that's a way of appropriating home and not just inhabit it that I think, Rod, for you has been the blessing of your movement, your exile and return, so to speak. And maybe that's a larger metaphor for our whole relationship to place, that we shouldn't fetishize it, but that there's a dialectic operating. I think nobody's mentioned Yifu Tuan's essay in the book, so let me mention that. He was our keynote speaker at our first conference. He's a Chinese-born, I say Chinese-American, but he was Chinese-born and an immigrant to the United States, and has this. He's still alive, teaches at the University of Wisconsin, is a marvelous man who is probably the creator of the field of cultural geography, so I would argue anyway. And he has a book called Hearth and Cosmos, which I think perfectly captures this sense of how we have dual aspects in ourselves, that we are drawn to the cosmos, to this a sense of connection to what is universal, to what transcends such things as place and particularity and locality. But we also are rooted. We are rooted in the particularity of our being in our creatureliness, to, again, borrow from Rod. And that these are irreducibly both parts of who and what we are. So that that dialectic ideally should be a balance, should be mutually nourishing. I think what's clear to me is there's a widespread sense that we've lost that we are much too much cosmos and not enough hearth, and that some way needs to be introduced to rectify that problem, to bring about that balance. Just a couple more words. I did want to get this quote from Barry in that is so nice, because he can be very blunt and direct in his language, and with all this highfalutin academic talk, it's good to have some air clearing. But I'll give you the context. It's an interview he did, and he describes a response. He often speaks to college audiences. He describes a dialogue he had with a student, and I want to mention that one of the things that made me convinced, and Ted McAllister convinced, that this was an important topic to explore was the response we had from the young people, our students, one of whom is right here in the front row. Yeah, under the chair there. And that to the idea, you're going to do a conference on plays? Wow, this was something that they immediately resonated to. Whereas, all, people, I would say, over the age of 50 or so, 60 maybe, would kind of, place? I mean, you can do a conference on air, on, volume, it just seems so abstract, place. But young people, they got it immediately. And I think it has something to do with the attenuation of the sense of place because of our digital technologies, because with all of their wonders, because of our sense of the fluidity of the world, of the movement of capital, labor, of boundaries of nations, of peoples. This sense of great possibility and fluidity is also dizzying. It's also troubling, upsetting even. And so I think this is when Ted and I realized we were on to something with this. It was when we saw the response from students when we started talking about it. And so let me read this quote from Wendell Berry, then I will stop and we'll open things up. He's asked by the interviewer, well, you left Port Royal from Kentucky. You had great jobs in the universities, and yet you made the decision to come back. Why? And Barry says this, well, because I loved the place. Both my father and my mother came from the Port Royal neighborhood, and I was one of the farm-raised young people who loved both farming and the place. The important part's yet to come here, though. Port Royal is what a lot of people have been schooled to call nowhere. I remember a college student who told me, I'm from a little nowhere place in Illinois. Forgive me. I'm from a little nowhere place in Illinois. And I said, wait a minute. I want to ask you something. Who told you that where you come from in Illinois is nowhere? There is no such place as nowhere. And close quotations. He goes on to say, we've dumped our garbage in our places. We've polluted them and mistreated them in every way because we thought they were nowhere. It's extremely important, it seems to me, that these nowhere places should be inhabited by people who will speak for them. And, one might add, will regard them as somewhere, as places. I better stop there. Thank you.